How would you like it if I gave you one prompt to build the app of your dreams? No hard work required at all. Just one single sentence plugged into one prompt that will build anything you've ever dreamed of. Well, I don't have it, so let me know if you find one. Instead, today we're going to ground ourselves in reality and walk through a multi-step system that you can use to go from idea man to SaaS hero in realistically a few hours. Too often, the vibe code process looks something like this. Come up with a kind of cool app idea, start prompting it without really thinking a lot about it, get a bunch of random features out that kind of miss the mark, try undoing the pieces of it that you didn't actually like, end up with a kind of janky app and a bit of a bloated code base, try to undo some of that, run into a bunch of errors, smash your head against the keyboard for a few hours, give up entirely, come up with a new kind of cool idea, and repeat the process, never actually getting a final product that you like out the other side. Well, that cycle is going to end today because I'm going to show you how to build a solid MVP in the IDE of your choice with the language model of your choice by bucking modern vibe code wisdom and adopting a new train of thought, actually taking the time to plan the thing out to begin with. So we're going to go through each of the 8 steps from high-level ideation through to code generation. We're going to talk about each step, why it's important, and how to actually do it with exact prompts. All of those prompts, by the way, are available for free inside the school group below this video. So this video is going to be great for you if you fancy yourself a vibe coder, but you kind of struggle when it comes to going from great high-level idea down to actual tactical, detailed implementation of that idea. Or 2, if you're in that hurry up and wait kind of camp where you know this is the thing you need to be doing now, you're trying to hop on the trend, but you're just waiting for a solid system or a solid process before you start actually doing it. Now, the reason this process is so important is this. If you want to build amazing things with AI-generated code, you need to adopt a planning mindset. The AI may be able to write lines of code for you, help you debug through code, might even be able to help you pick out a tech stack, but it can't yet replace human thinking and creativity. So you need to adopt the mindset of a thinker and let AI simply be the weapon that you wield to get things done. So that being said, let's hop in and look at the process. So in order to really build something practical and useful, you need to get past the point of vague ideas and turn them into concrete specifics. If you remember that whole cycle I mentioned in the beginning of the video, that stems from poor or absent planning. And so specifically, you want to spend time at first to really think through the MVP and what it should do. And that's what this first prompt is really about. So we can just come through, and I will make all of this available to you guys below the video, of course. Come through and just copy this, and then we're going to paste it into Claude, and we are going to hit go, and then we're going to chat about it. So we start off with a little bit of persona prompting. So we're basically saying, hey, you're a SaaS founder, and the thing that makes you unique is you have this hyper focus on problem solving. So you're actually more obsessed with the problem than you are the solution. And so your job is to do exactly that and kind of go back and forth with us on this exercise in order to help us really dial in what it is that we're about to build. And then we say, we're going to provide 2 things below: a core idea for the app and our understanding of what we think the MVP should be. And then of course we say, every time the user replies back to you with the questions that you had, I want you to integrate those answers and regenerate me an entirely new output. So we can have this iterative brainstorming kind of cycle going on. So that is the goal of this prompt. And then we get into the format that we want the output in. So I like to give an elevator pitch. Then we talk about the problem, the audience for that problem, unique selling point, platforms we're going to build it on. And then we get into the first batch of features that we're going to have in this app. And then for each of those features, we start breaking down what are the actual requirements and user stories behind those features, meaning like how could you describe a user moving through this specific feature or set of features? What does their experience actually look like? Then we break down some UX considerations, non-functional requirements that need to be there. So how fast does it need to, for example, be able to render content? Maybe you're uploading images. How long does that process realistically need to complete in? What are different security considerations based on what the app actually is? How are you intending to make money on it? And then we say, and any of your critical questions will go below that. And then we give it a few guidelines. So clarify things if there's something that seems ambiguous. Make sure we're not skipping over anything like super important. Give suggestions for new features that may not have been in the initial thought I had for the MVP. And then we get down to the context section where we're going to give it our idea. And so for this specific app that we're going to move through in this example, I want to create a prompt repository where users can store their commonly used prompts in a centralized area. They should be shareable, have privacy settings, support Markdown and XML formatting, because I use a lot of XML in my prompts. And then a really basic MVP. I want the user to sign up, log in or sign up, they should be able to create a hierarchy of how they're going to actually store this stuff in folders or whatever it's going to be. They should be able to create new prompts, add them into the storage, and then retrieve, view, and edit existing prompts. Now, when I'm thinking of this, I obviously want there to be a lot more than just this in the app. But I want to build an MVP. What is the smallest version of this thing that's going to actually be functional and valuable to somebody? So for me specifically, I use a lot of different AI tools and my prompts are all over the place. Some of them are in a notepad on my computer. Some of them are in a Google Drive. Some of them are in my Obsidian note-taking system, all over the place. And so this is solving a concrete problem for me. Now, again, there's stuff that I know I could build on top of this, but this is the most basic version of this thing that would at least still be valuable to me. So we put all that in there and then we let it go through and answer that question. So it does the elevator pitch for us, problem statement, target audience, professional prompt engineers, content creators, developers, and AI power users. Yeah. Secondary, teams and organizations that want to share prompts across the organization. It's actually an interesting use case that I wasn't thinking of, but now thinking in a business context. We have this all the time where different people in our teams have different prompts that they use for things and they're not really sharing them with each other, but they'll talk about the outputs. So I think that's pretty cool. And then AI enthusiasts, people that just want to learn, right, about this stuff. So what is the unique selling point? So this is already it's kind of starting to extrapolate on what I had. I mean, so that's cool that it supports Markdown and XML with syntax highlighting, Git-like version control for prompt evolution. I actually really like that idea because I go through a lot and I'm basically copying docs over all the time in order to update prompts. And it would be really dope if it was a Git-like version control where I can merge prompts together and have actual version control for prompts. I really like that. I don't think that would go in an MVP though. Important consideration there. So breaking down some of this stuff, I'm going to build this as a web app to start with. I think the idea of making it like a desktop app using Electron is cool, but that's not really my thought out of the gate. And then it's breaking down the different features that we have here. So email password sign in for the authentication, a guided onboarding, pretty straightforward. Prompt organization, a lot of different ideas inside of here. Prompt creation and editing, prompt management, search and discovery, sharing. I'm going to actually gut this out of the MVP. Same thing with analytics. I'm going to gut that out of the MVP. And then it goes down and breaks down all the UX considerations for these different places, right? So they say I should have a grid list view in the dashboard. So different things like that. I'm not going to go into these in super detail. Then we get into the non-functional requirements, right? So search results need to come back in 200 milliseconds or less. Prompts should load fast. Needs to be able to handle thousands of prompts realistically, potentially per user. Would use a CDN if there's any static assets, right? So it goes on and on and on and on. And then it gets to this part where they have critical questions or clarifications. And this is where we can come through and we can start answering these. So for example, integration strategy. Should we prioritize direct integrations with specific AI tools or focus on copy-paste initially? MVP, I'm going to do copy-paste. Privacy, I'm not even going to have real privacy settings. It's going to be scoped to just one user, so this won't matter in the beginning. Allowing users to rate prompts, I mean, kind of cool, but not going to be doing that right now. Specific XML schemas, should we provide validation? I don't think validation is super important. I could see that being somewhat complicated to do. So I'm going to leave that out for now. Same thing, no teams and migration paths. We support importing from specific formats. No, not going to worry about any of that right now. So that is the first output that we have here, okay? And I've gone through this all already, and I have this pasted in here just for speed of this. So now we can see that output that we have. And we want to like really make sure we prune through that and think through the context of MVP, okay? MVP, MVP, MVP. Don't put in here every feature that you think this thing might have at some point in time, because the water is going to get muddied and you're going to end up with a overly technical specification that's going to be too much of a beast to be able to manage. We can build on that stuff in the future if we build the proper foundation. And so what I did in this version was I went through, and some of those things that I said I didn't really care that much about right now, like these, I would cut them out, okay? I don't want them being built, so I'm going to cut them out. So again, key takeaway of this section, get an MVP, a clear scoping of the features we want to see, and address any critical concerns now. Again, skipping this piece probably will mean doom for your app. So let's not resign ourselves to being dead on arrival. So step 2, we get into the high level technical decisions. So based on this MVP we're building, what do we actually need? What has to be there for this thing to function? We're not fleshing out features in super high fidelity. We're not writing any code. We're not even writing pseudocode. For example, if I was going to have an image uploading component of my app, then okay, I probably need something in place like a CDN to handle the actual image delivery to users, so that's not pulling from my server every single time someone wants to access one of the images. How are images going to actually get compressed when they get uploaded? If I have thousands of people that start uploading images every day, how am I going to put a queuing system in place so that my server doesn't crash? So all of those things would be things we want to think about in this stage. So that's what we're going to flesh out here. So in this section, I'm trying to basically take each feature and then I think of it like attaching a tech stack to each of those features. So I know every piece of technology that needs to interface with that feature. And so like we just did before, we can come through here. We can copy that. I'm going to create a fresh window here, fresh context window. I'm going to paste it in. We're going to let it go, and then we're going to chat about it. So like always, we start off with our goal. And basically what we're telling it is, hey, you're a senior software engineer, and our job here is to get a really full picture of this application. Anytime I answer you, you need to reintegrate those responses into the overall output so we're always keeping an up-to-date iteration of what this thing currently is. Now, as we scroll down, we get into how are we going to format that response? How are we going to format our output? So basically what we do is we go through each feature and we give a 2 to 3 sentence summary of what that feature is. What are the bulleted list of tech involved in that feature? And then what are any main requirements involved in that feature? And we'll look at what this output looks like in just a second. Then we get to a system diagram. I like having a system diagram so that I can actually look at it and see where everything connects because I'm a very visual person. And then we tell the system, hey, if there's any technical or architectural type of considerations that I probably am not thinking of, let me know what those things are. Okay, then any specific warnings or guidance that we have for this specific app that we know of ahead of time, we can place in here. And then what we do is we paste in all those features that we had from the last step. So our authentication and user management, prompt organization, prompt creation and editing. Boom, all right inside of there. And then the last piece is we give our tech choices. Now, I would advise that you decide the tech stack before entering into this stage. For the most part, not that you have to have every single thing filled out. The best way to probably do that is to take a step before this, think about the MVP, and ask it to recommend you different pieces of the tech stack. Or, and I've done this before, you can put it in this section and say, recommend me any missing pieces of the tech stack and see what kind of output you get from that. So our output here is basically a list of each primary feature, right? Authentication and user management, prompt organization. with a sentence of what it needs to be, what it is, the main tech involved in this. So for example, for like the foldering and the organization of things, React drag and drop or Framer motion, Postgres, Next.js server actions, Prisma ORM for complex queries. What are the main requirements? Recursive folder structure with unlimited nesting, many-to-many relationships for prompt tags, rule engines for smart collections, efficient tree traversal for folder operations, and so on. And so it goes through and it does this for every single feature that we have. So this isn't necessarily exhaustive, but it is moving us in the direction of having a clear understanding of what is going on. And so naturally, you would want to come through here and start answering these questions. For example, will we put rate limiting in place? How many users are we actually expecting? What type of media can they upload? How are prompts going to actually be stored? Can two different users modify the same prompt at the same time? Right? All of those things are things that you realistically want to think about. And it gave us a pretty big list. Now, the reason that there's value in this step is that by the time we get to task management, there is already a very clear relationship between the different pieces of code that it's going to start building and what it needs in order to build that part effectively. We can also make decisions or trade-offs ahead of time so that we're not knee-deep in developing a bunch of stuff and then we realize maybe we bit off way more than we could chew with a complicated solution. So again, critical step that helps us start thinking about the app ahead of time. So at this stage, I like to pause for a second, take our head out of the clouds, or maybe in the weeds, shall I say, and get into some brainstorming of what the user experience should actually be like. The unavoidable truth is that great products, whether it's software or anything, make a user feel a specific way about themselves or the world around them. So how can we move toward that world intentionally instead of just letting a language model do whatever the hell it wants? We do that by giving it our features and then asking it to start thinking through different user stories and how the app might change based on the interactions a user takes. So again, we are going to take our prompt, we're going to fly over here, we're going to paste it in, and then we are going to look at it, okay? So again, bit of persona prompting, and we want this SaaS founder to take in our list of features and our high-level app idea, and we want to now start thinking through our user stories. Okay, so again, we're doing this same like iterative cycle where we're going to be having a conversation back and forth and trying to refine this plan, and then we tell it what format we want it to have. So for each feature, I want you to break down the different user stories, okay? I want you to list the persona of the person and what their interaction looks like, right? So as an X, I want to Y, so that Z. And you'll see what this looks like in just a second. So we go through and do that for our different features, breaking down the user stories, and then we break down the UX UI considerations. So I want a bulleted step-by-step user journey. And what I'm specifically starting to get toward are the different states that the app is going to be in. And there will be a follow-up on this one later. But just trying to understand, like, okay, a user is starting to move through this app. How are they moving through it? What are they trying to do specifically? What is their workflow as a user? And how might things be changing along the way because of that? And then as we scroll down, we start giving some UX guides, okay? I've used these in a lot of other videos if you want to go see follow-ups on what exactly we are prompting and why we are doing that. But these are basically just giving UX guidelines. Things like using breathable white space with strategic color accents to create visual hierarchies, using negative space, making sure that we're not overloading the user with too much information, right? Using like progressive information disclosure. Doing all of these sorts of things. And then again, we come down and we're pasting in that original feature list that we had. And then we are pasting in those app details, right? That first stage where we got the elevator pitch and all of that. We're pasting it in so that it has full context of this app. Okay. And now let's see what we get. So I'm going to skip past the authentication user management stuff just because it's Not a great example. So for example, inside of our category of features that is organizing our prompts, what are the different categorizations of what a user is going to do? Well, they're going to create folders and tags. How are those things going to be arranged? So user stories, right? If I'm a power user, I want to be able to create nested folders so that I can organize prompts. If I'm a more visual person, I might be really into color coding things so that I can really quickly identify what's what. If I'm a curator and maybe I'm intending to sell this thing at some point in time, sell these prompts, I might be using combinations of those things so that it's a very flexible, dynamic system. And now based on that, what are some of the core UX considerations? What is it going to actually look like? How is a user going to be interacting with this? So left-hand sidebar has a collapsible folder tree. Okay, I can kind of see what that's going to look like. If I right-click on a folder, it should have like a native context menu where I can start taking actions. Pretty cool. Drag and drop functionality should have visual feedback. When I create tags, it should have an autocomplete functionality in case I have the tags already. You should also have a color picker, right? Breadcrumbs. It's starting to really think through what these things need to look like. Same thing with edge cases or advanced user cases. And it goes through and continues this process for all of our main features that we had listed out earlier. And so as we just continue to scroll this document, it just continues and continues and continues. So for example, in the prompt creation or prompt editing section, things like syntax highlighting I think would be really cool. Variable insertions would be really cool. A token counter at the bottom, especially for coding type stuff, would be really valuable. So we've got a pretty detailed plan starting to form. And a lot of these things, again, are things that we probably would not have thought of if we just went into a tool like Replit and said, hey, go build me a prompt management system, right? We'd get something kind of basic that has a 1/20th of the amount of functionality that this is going to have, and it wouldn't really wow us in any way. So let's zoom it out for a second. We started fleshing out our features. Then we thought through all of the major tech that we're going to need in order to make that thing come alive. Then we started hashing out how is a user going to be interacting with this thing from point A to point B. They click on this thing. It's got these things there. Now we need to take one more side quest to talk about what is this going to actually look like? What does the UI look like? So step number 4 is style guides and state designs. So there's really two pieces to think about here. First, each screen technically has different states that it could exist in. A basic example, what happens when it's empty? What happens when a request fails? What happens if a user takes a successful action? And we need our UX to reflect that, right? We want it to look the part and feel professional. Second, we need to style it all, meaning colors, typography, spacing, animations. Here is how we do all of that. So this one is technically a two-parter. And so I'm going to paste in this first part, and then we're going to talk about what we have going on. So we're going to copy all of this. We're going to pop over. We're going to paste it in. But before we hit go, we want to pull some inspiration. And so I love to use this tool, Mobbin, because it pulls app screens and websites from a lot of really successful companies. And so we can look at apps, we can look at sites. Oh, here we go. Switcher down here. And then what we can do is we can come through and we can find one of the designs that we actually like. Okay, maybe it was this one, for example, and you started paging through this and you were like, hey, this really makes sense. This is how I want it to be. You're going to go through and you're going to find something that aesthetically catches your eye. And so, for example, say we really liked 11 Labs. We can come in here and then we can just start downloading screens out of this tool. So we can start downloading all the screens. I came through and picked about 10 of these out that I liked. And then all I did was come through here, go into my file selector, picked all of these images. And then once it finished processing those, just hit upload. While that's going, let's look at what this prompt is. So we start with a bit of persona prompting. Then we tell it, hey, look at these inspirations that we have. Again, we are prompting it with our aesthetic guidelines since this is really like a design exercise. We give it our app overview, okay? elevator pitch, all that stuff from the first prompt. So it knows like, who are you building this for? And then we're telling it, I want you to build me a style guide. And a style guide needs to consist of the following: different colors, right? Accents, primary colors, background colors, so on. All the font considerations, different like shared component styling, different animation considerations, how things should be spaced out, things like that. And then I give a comprehensive example of one, okay, where we have everything in here. Color palette, secondary colors, accent colors. It goes through the entire thing. And so if we zoom out for a second, what are we asking the system? We're saying, I need you to take this primary idea that I have for my app, and I want you to take these inspiration that we have, okay, all of these different images, and I want you to combine those things and return me a comprehensive color palette for my app. And so now if we come down and click on what it made us here, we can see exactly what that looks like. Now, if there were specifics that you knew you wanted to have, like, hey, I wanted to have, I don't know, certain reds or blues, or like you had a color palette in mind, you could prompt that in here as well. But point being, it is starting to generate for us a pretty comprehensive UI spec sheet, I guess we could call it, style guide. Even down to, hey, when you're in the editor and you're going to have syntax highlighting, for keywords, you should use, this purple color, right? And so it's really starting to pull all of this stuff together. And so if we go back now into our prompt, we have this second piece, which I will, again, copy and paste in down here. And now what this is going to do is it's going to take all of that stuff we just had, but it is going to start thinking about the state that each screen can be in at any given point in time. Now, this is an example where talking about the registration flow actually makes why we do this pretty clear. So let's think of like registering, right? Registering as a user. I can have the initial state where I haven't actually done anything yet, right? I'm on this registration page, but I haven't actually done anything, right? So there's going to be placeholder text in there that says enter your email. There might be social button logins there, right? There's going to be all of this different stuff. And then what happens when I actually click in to the email and I'm going to start typing in my email? Well, then, hey, it should do a little bit of a focusing, right? Subtle purple glow, real-time validation. It gives a green check mark if it's a positive validation and a red shake if it's an invalid one. What does it look like when it's actually like loading, right? It's now I've said, hey, yeah, go register me, and it's processing and it doesn't know if it's successful or not yet. What is that going to look like, right? Circles with gradient colors rotating to create an animation. The input field becomes like a little bit kind of grayed out. What happens then when it is successful? This is pretty cool. Modal content slides up and then fades out. New content slides in from the bottom, saying that it just sent you something and says, check your inbox, right? This is pretty cool. This is where we're starting again to get into the nitty gritty of it, right? Again, I use the example of if I was going to use something like Replit or V0 and just say, hey, go build this thing, I probably would have gotten a functional sign up, right? Registration page, but would it have had this level of detail in it? No, probably not, right? Unless you prompted this type of stuff into Replit in batches or into V0 in batches. But if you're going to do that, then why are you using that tool in the first place? And now as we go down and down and down and down, we can see that it's just repeating this, right? So now we get into the creating a folder, okay? Well, let's think about the sidebar. It can have a collapsed state. It could have an expanded state. It can have a state where you just hit the click button and now you're starting to drag it. And what is it going to look like there, right? And it's talking about using spring physics and all of this type of stuff. So like I said, this goes on and on and on for all of those different features. And you could probably start to see why I said start with an MVP, right? Because this is a lot of detail and you don't want to lose this detail as you move from stage to stage. And I'm going to show you something really cool when we get to the planning stage on how we make sure it keeps the context. So now at this point, we have like a pretty clear idea of the features we're going to be building, what's kind of happening within those features, some of the details we're going to incorporate later on maybe. And now this is important because a lot of these things can be a pain in the ass to deal with later if we don't codify the solutions now. But once we're done, we can move on to the most detailed section yet, the technical specifications. So now we want to take those high-level plans that we generated a few steps ago, and we want to get to the level of detailed app architecture planning. So basically taking everything we've done so far and starting to merge them together into something cohesive. Now, I will say one disclaimer. A lot of other people disregard those 2 design steps we just went through, and they just ask in this stage to generate designs. Now, you can do that, but you're not going to get anything nearly as close to the level of detail that we just got out of that exercise. So I find that it's valuable to break those stages apart and do them separately and then bring them back together later. Now, this is the last real step before we start actual task planning, so it's important to get it right. So again, we give a goal, which is saying, hey, we're making a detailed PRD, basically. And now we're going to give it this format, which I have hobbled, which is a little bit of a Frankenstein of a bunch of different stuff that I have found out there online. Some things coming out of the LLM, some things from other software engineers, a lot of different things, kind of merged them together, and this is what I'm currently using. And so let's talk about it. So the format that we want this thing in, first we want our high-level summary. I always like to keep these so that it has the context of where we're trying to go with this thing at all times. Then we get into reiterating those system architecture type of considerations. And then for each feature that we're building, we're starting to get into more detail on it. So what are the actual technical requirements? What are the actual details of implementing this type of feature? So instead of saying, hey, this thing collapses or hey, this thing expands in a sidebar for the folder structure, we start talking about what type of like built-in Next.js components are we going to be using? How is Tailwind going to be integrated into this for the styling? Where is, Framer Motion going to come into play for some of the animations that we're doing? We're starting to, again, we're not writing the code yet per se. We're maybe doing some pseudocode, but we're starting to get very detailed. What are the different data models, for example, that are going to be important for this feature? Then we go into specifically the data architecture. So starting to build out all the different tables that are going to be on the back end in a lot of detail. What do the API endpoints need to look like for both internal APIs or if we're making external requests and doing things with other services like OpenAI or Anthropic, if we were using their APIs for something, starting to document that stuff. Security and privacy considerations. Reiterating and consolidating that overarching design system that we had worked on. And then the actual infrastructure and deployment of the app. So then again, we're just going through and we're filling in all the detail from the previous steps, okay? So what is the tech stack we're going to be using? What are the aesthetic guidelines? What is the actual app design system that we had created in the previous step so it knows to fill it in? What are all the different app screen states that we just brainstormed, right? All of that stuff that we just got from these previous steps are going in here. And now let's look at the type of output that we get from it. So first we have this, you could think of it as an executive summary where it's brainstorming everything. So we have our Next.js with server actions for the back end. We're using Supabase, Prisma ORM, Clerk for authentication. We're going to deploy on Vercel. We're going to use Tailwind. We're going to do state management with ZooStand. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Okay, so we're going through all of that, and then we get into the real detailed sections. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of these sections in detail. You will have the output in the doc that I'll be linking. But again, we're basically going through everything we have. So high-level architecture, how are things going to be connected together? Different tech stack pieces that are going to be used. What are the different user stories? So for example, in the authentication piece of the app, here are the different user stories associated with just that sign in, sign up process. What are the different technical requirements involved in that? And then we do some pseudocode for the actual implementation of things. We start talking about what the user models are going to look like. So we're really just going ham on the the technical details of this thing, right? So for each piece of the app that we have, templates and snippets, what are the different user stories? What do they need to be able to do? What are the tech requirements involved in that? And then how are we going to implement that in detail? What does the database look like? How does it kind of work? And so on. So again, this repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. We go through data architecture, different APIs that we're going to have, external integration documentation. How is Clerk going to get hooked into this? Our design system gets included in here. So point being, tons and tons and tons of information. And it can seem like a lot. But if you were to actually copy all of this and look at how many tokens it is, it's actually not that many tokens. I think this entire thing is like 15,000 tokens that we're going to put into the next stage. So it's actually quite manageable for a language model. Now, if you don't go through this stage, I will say right now, you give a huge level of autonomy and control to the language model to decide what this app is going to be. So again, I know I say this at each step, but this is really a critical stage where you're going to decide the future of how this thing actually gets built and whether or not it's good. You want an app that is going to be uniquely yours, right? If you do what every other person does and just go to a tool like Replit, and I'm not shitting on Replit, by the way, but if you just go into one of those tools and say, build me a prompt management tool, you're just going to get out whatever random thing the language model decided that meant. If you go through this process, you're going to spend more time in it in the planning phase, but you're going to get something out the other side that is actually good. So step 6 is rules. So before we really get into fleshing this thing out, we want to make sure that we have guardrails in place. So this is obviously going to be project dependent, right? Because rules are largely driven by the type of framework or technologies or tools that you're using. So if you're building a React Native app, then Next.js rules aren't going to really apply to you. So let me show you where this actually fits into our prompt system. So this is a website that I like to use. It's called playbooks.com. And they have different rules in here for different languages. The one I'm looking at here is specifically for Next.js. And so what you would do is come through and copy this. Now these are meant to describe best practices for full stack development using Next.js. And so we would come through here and copy this. And then when we step back to our prompt system that we have, let's talk about this. So like with anything else, we start with our goal prompt, okay? So we're telling it what it is meant to do. In this case, it's meant to create a detailed step-by-step plan that retains high degree of granularity, right? We don't want to leave out all of these details that we've been making. So we say exactly that, and then we tell it to look for specific context, namely the tech specification doc that we just made, any critical project rules, which we just went and found, and then the core application intent, which was that thing we got from step 1 where we had the elevator pitch and all of that stuff. Then as we scroll down, I found this, and I've been using it. I found it floating around on Twitter somewhere, where we're going through and we're breaking down each section and then all of the steps in the section. So we're actually building our task plan out. So we're going to use a really high context window language model, and we're going to use it to break this into individual tasks. And so this is a kind of large departure from using like an MCP server that does task planning, because it tends to retain a lot more detail. A lot of those task planning tools, they're really good when it comes to small features, right? Small tasks that you need done. But for something that's this big, right? Building this entire thing, it is going to drop so much context that all this stuff we've just spent time building isn't going to make its way through. And so we want to use a system when we're creating the app for the first time that can actually optimize and retain all of that information. And so what we're going to do is we're going to paste this prompt in, and then we're going to use a workflow that I'm going to show you called an evaluator optimizer. So let's get in and I'll show you how that works. So it's going to go through and it's going to build this detailed step-by-step list for all of the different primary sections of our application. And then when we get down here, we are putting in, again, that detailed technical specification that we just made, right? And so if we were to scroll through all of this, This is literally just copy pasted over from inside of Claude, okay? Then we're pasting in those project rules that we had, and then we are pasting in our core elevator pitch. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna copy all of this, okay? And then we are gonna go into Gemini. And the reason that I'm using this is it has a very, very large context window, and I find that it retains the step-by-step instructions, at least right now, better than some other options. Now, you don't have to use this. Use whatever you have access to. And so after that processes, we get this first output, right? We get that implementation plan. And so basically what it's doing is it's going phase by phase, step by step, and telling us exactly what needs to be done. So for example, phase 1 in this case would be the core project configuration and setup, right? And so it's saying, okay, well, your step number 1 is that you need to initialize Next.js and install all of your core dependencies, okay? But we can see when we start getting into stuff like the files, for example, it's not necessarily adding every single dependency, for example, that we might need. And as we continue to go through this, we can see that that trend kind of continues, but we go step by step. So the next stage would be setting up Tailwind, setting up Prisma and actually connecting to Supabase, configuring our environment variables, and it just continues, right? So we go through into authentication, then we get into the core application setup, and we go all the way through to step 20, which would be the actual deployment. And so this is where we can get into this thought of how well actually is this conforming to that initial project specification prompt that I gave it. And so what we want to do is we want to ask it to evaluate itself. Evaluate your plan against the original text specification, update your output, giving me fresh end-to-end output that covers everything based on the following. How well did you account for all the pieces of the tech stack? How well did you consider the dependencies between different steps? How well did you account for the different states of each screen? And what it's going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to actually evaluate itself against that. So for example, it didn't really talk much about the actual state management libraries. Or despite the fact that we gave it all the different states for error and loading and all of that, it only really focused on the success path. Tell it to go back through now and actually update that based on that initial plan we had, plus the gaps that it found in its own response against that plan. And so it goes through and it does that. Now, one thing I noticed is that actually cut out some of the steps. So I said, why did you do that, right? It went back and it actually added in a lot more detail back into the system. And now I just want to repeat this, but I want it to look specifically at the UX and UI, because you remember we spent a lot of time hashing out different state screens and what things might look like in different states and all of that. And so I want to make sure that it's remembering that stuff that we talked about and that it's building it into the plan that it has. And so we basically say the same thing where we say, how well did you specify the UX UI considerations? How well did we consider the different screen/feature states and how they change? And so first I want you to evaluate yourself, and then I want you to pass back through each step and add a section called UX UI where you give a similar one-liner specifying any critical UX to consider. And so again, what this is going to do is it's going to go through and it is going to evaluate how it did at each stage, okay? Then once it's done that, it goes through and it revamps the entire plan. So now we have an 8-phase plan all the way down through production readiness, where we're talking about security steps and so on. Now, one last thing that I did, you guys know I like to use Manus a lot for planning. And so I actually took my Manus output, which was a lot more detailed. There were a lot more steps actually in it. And I told Google this was another output from another chat. And I had it basically evaluate that and take the best thing from each of them and talk about like practically what the differences were. So I think of all the vibe coding I've done, the biggest source of frustration is when you spend time detailing out this plan or this really intricate thing that you want. And then when you go to actually build that thing, it doesn't actually retain all of the details. And so that's why I tried to integrate this evaluator optimizer kind of idea. And I think that's something that you should think about implementing in a lot of your workflows wherever you can. How well do you grade yourself versus the instructions I just gave you and then what you gave me back? And we could obviously make this thing a lot more robust if we needed to. And so now on to the final step, actually generating the code. Now, the way that I prefer to do this is step by step, meaning I have this detailed list that I just got from Gemini, stage 1, step 1, all the way down through step 28. So I'm going to actually take each step, pass it into a coding tool, and let it fly from there. But I'm doing it step by step. Then I'll pick up the next one and just continue the cycle until everything is built. So let's check that out. So I'm going to go in and I am going to open up Claude Code inside of my terminal. I'm going to type in IDE to load in my IDE. Okay, and so now that this is ready to go, I'm going to pop back into Gemini. Okay, and I'm going to take my phase 1 and I'm going to start right here. I'm going to hop into my Claude Code and I'm just going to paste that in and I'm going to let that piece run. Now, the next piece after this is done that we're going to notice is step 2, for example, configuring Tailwind CSS with a full design system. That design system, right, is in another file still. And so what we need to do when we copy this over is we need to go back to our reference and make sure we're passing in other relevant context when we go to build this thing. Okay, so that took a minute or two. Now that that's done, I'm going to pop back in, right? And I'm going to go into Gemini. I'm going to take my step 2 for configuring the Tailwind system. I'm going to copy all of that. I'm going to hop back in. I'm going to paste it. And now I'm going to also say, make sure to reference /style guide styleguide.markdown for creating the Tailwind CSS system. Okay, now the reason that I've done that, what I actually did when the screen was paused is I went through and I just copied our style guide out of here. Okay, I just copied this out and I put it in the actual project directory so that I have access to it. And then when I prompt Claude Code, I can tell it, hey, go read inside of here. And so what this is going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to actually build out my Tailwind styling for this based on like what we had in here. So it's going to go through, it's going to actually integrate all of this into the app. And so now we're going to go through, we're just going to keep repeating this cycle step by step. Now, one thing I will say, if you're an actual engineer or you're more comfortable in these workflows, you could probably get away with giving larger prompt chunks to the tool. But if you're a beginner or a noob, you need to understand your own limitations. And you need to try to let these tools meet you where you're at. So I recommend giving tasks in smaller chunks and trying to actually understand what has been built. If it makes a new directory for you, try to go in there and ask the system to explain to you what's in that file so you actually understand what's going on and what has been made. If you give it too many steps at once, you're not going to be able to see where it may have gone off the rails. You're not going to be able to test in between different phases. And like I said, guys, process continues, right? So we could come through here now, maybe copy a few different steps at this time because we're getting a little bit more confident. We come through, paste it all in, and we just let the system run from there. All right, guys, this is getting spliced. Getting spliced in. So I wanted to show you guys like what an output of this looks like, right? So I'm splicing this in at the end of the video. This is technically the next day from when I started recording this. I wanted to actually go through and do that task by task system. It took me about 2 hours to do this. And the thing that I will say, about an hour and 45 minutes of that, full disclosure, was me dealing with type errors. And so something I would do going back is I would put rules in place on how the system needs to deal with TypeScript and the typing of everything in the project. So again, I was going back and forth with Claude Code for about an hour and a half. I was on a Zoom meeting. I was letting it run kind of in the background as I was talking with people and doing things. Hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes for it to fix all of the different type error issues that I was having, but we got through it. And so here is what this thing built out for us, right? So we have this dashboard in here. I think it actually looks pretty nice, right? Going back, like I don't actually like this purple into pink color scheme, so I think I would probably go back and update some of this stuff. And so a few of these routes in the sidebar, some of them might go to 404 pages because they're not quite built yet. And so that's an area where I would then go back and say like, hey, we need to dial in this folders page. What I like to do is, again, use that evaluator optimizer workflow. And I say, hey, here is the task by task plan you gave me, and here's the original prompt. What do you think is missing with respect to this specific feature? So I said, with respect to the folder feature specifically, what did you miss from that plan? And then I'm just going iteratively through, giving it to the coding tool and just hopping back and forth. But it did a pretty good job with this first batch. So this is what it looks like when we actually have one in place. And now if I was to go create a new prompt, I can give it a name, right? So like test 2. I could come in here, copy a prompt like this one, go back in, and now if I paste this in, we can see it's doing some auto formatting, right? It's doing like XML kind of syntax highlighting, and it's doing the same thing for Markdown. I can choose a different platform, like Claude, for example. I could say, is it draft? Is it published? Is it archived? It comes with a default folder. I could go add new folders in. I could add tags, mark it as favorite. So a lot of cool stuff. It even has this little preview functionality. So if I click that and come down here, I can now see a preview of what it will actually look like. And if I create the prompt, it goes through and creates it in here. I can see it's in draft mode. I can go through, see what it looks like. Again, it has version history in here. I'm not sure if this is hooked up, but that's something I would want to go fix. Got some Next.js issues down here that we could go back and deal with. But we can see that it's creating these. And then if I hop over into my Supabase setup and I were to come into and look at all of my different tables that got created, if I go into prompts, I can now see that I have my prompts being populated in Supabase. So it did everything, right? There is not any real secret stuff I did under the hood. So ultimately, again, pretty happy with what I got out of this. And I'm just going to continue to go through now and actually build this thing out. And then I think future videos on the channel, we'll just use this as a baseline for how we can do things like build new features and things like that into the app. Because there's a lot of stuff that I know now that I have this like getting toward an MVP. I know there's other stuff that I want to put in here. I'm considering having a marketplace so that people can actually buy and trade prompts from each other. I think that would be really cool. I want to add in different like social sharing things. I want to add in functionality where you can actually use an AI system to improve on your prompts, right? So you can actually like hook in Claude, for example, and ask it to find areas to improve your prompts. A lot of stuff that I want to do. So I think this will serve as a really great foundation for other stuff we're going to build on the channel. So I'm super excited and happy of how this turned out. So that was great. Again, if you want the prompts, they are for free in the school group below this video. So go grab them. That's it for today. See you in the next video.